No words can say, no mouth can speak the glory of God that the heavens are shouting, and yet there is voice.
Maybe to put at ease those who worry too much about celebrating Christmas during Advent season, the Church gives us this fourth Sunday of Advent, the Christmas story, how the birth of Jesus came about. And as we celebrate this story, what I like is that it gives us a chance maybe to look at the birth of Jesus from different perspectives. We can take a little bit of liberty this fourth Sunday of Advent. We all know that on the 25th, we speak of Jesus, the one who is born. But prominent in Matthew's telling of the story is Joseph. Joseph, the husband of Mary. Joseph of the lineage of David. Joseph, a just and honorable man. And in many ways, Joseph has been a guiding light, a quiet support, a reminder that following his path might lead to blessing. As I think through my own life, I early in my priesthood was asked by Archbishop Gomez to assist with a lot of administrative functions in our local church that took a lot of time away from the more pastoral priorities for which I thought I had been ordained. I remember he asked me over lunch that he had to ask me this, if I would like to help with these responsibilities, taking over the work that Monsignor Steuben had been doing. And I answered him honestly, no, that's not something I would like to do. So of course he changed the subject. After a dinner of small talk, at the end he said, well, now I think you should pray about what we talked about and maybe we can talk again. And I said, Archbishop, maybe you misunderstood. Like, what I heard you ask was whether or not this is something I wanted to do. My answer, very honestly, is no. There's no prayer that would change that. But you didn't ask if I would do it, right? I placed my hands in Archbishop Flores's and promised obedience. And so probably this is something you have to pray about. And if you ask me to do it, of course I will. And I went home and sent him a list of more qualified people than myself and waited until the appropriate amount of time had passed and he could call and say, I've decided that this is your new job, which I embraced as best I could. But I remember after Archbishop Gustavo came and I'd helped for some period of time, I thought maybe it was time to leave that era of my priesthood behind. And I'd asked the Archbishop, I made the mistake of asking him 3 times. You don't make a bishop tell you no 3 times, as it turns out. If you're ever giving advice to a young priest, that's not a good idea. So on the 3rd time, I found out that it wasn't a good idea. And I asked if maybe I could go and make a retreat just to reflect on this reality of my life in priesthood, that it would be spent in a significant way in the more complex parts of church administration. And he said, sure. So I went, and I remember much of my retreat was with St. Joseph. And I tell this story on myself, but I have a feeling most of us could connect with it. Because Joseph really did not get treated very fairly by God. Right? Joseph had plans and dreams and hopes. Joseph had somehow convinced the most beautiful and probably most honorable woman in all of Nazareth to marry him. And he was about to start this wonderful life and build a family and teach his children how to follow in his footsteps. And Mary turns up pregnant, and an angel comes and tells him, don't worry, it's God's. Like, I think his first reaction must have been, well, and what gives God the right? You know, I mean, like this is my wife. And I can't imagine that he ever could have thought that much of his life would be spent in Egypt, protecting a child that wasn't even really his own. That when his child turned 12, he would make it abundantly clear whose he was. Joseph had to ponder these things and embrace them. But I would also say that Joseph lived a very good life, a very meaningful life, and that as late in his years, he lay on his bed knowing that his life here on earth was coming to an end. I can't imagine that he wasn't anything but proud and happy with the life that he had lived with Jesus and Mary, in the various encounters and struggles that were beyond anything he could have imagined, and yet a great blessing. I don't know any couples who a few years into marriage aren't surprised, disappointed, concerned by the fact that the reality is different than their hopes and expectations. And to find ways to understand, to ponder, to reflect on, to embrace the realities of our lives, and to allow God to work through our justice and our virtue, through our integrity, like St. Joseph, I think leads to a much better life than if we just sit and complain about how unfair everything is. And so this last Sunday of Advent, we tell the Christmas story. We see Mary and even the angel and baby Jesus. But prominent in this story is our brother Joseph. And St. Joseph, at least for me, has been a very helpful model. And maybe in each of our lives, there's room to embrace a little bit more of God's reality in our lives that comes in surprises and in struggles, that comes in the best of news that we would have never dreamed of, and the worst of news that we can't even imagine in our worst nightmares. And yet somewhere in the midst of all of that, following in a righteous man's footsteps, we might find in our own lives blessing and grace.
Telling the glory of